Joining me now is Sky News contributor Kosha Gada. Kosha, thank you for joining me. I want to start tonight with Joe Biden's farewell address to the nation. To me, it was more like a drivel to the nation. Thank goodness it's about to come to an end. But firstly, he warned that an oligarchy is taking shape in America. Have a listen.
Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead. We see the consequences all across America, and we've seen it before.
But this was most baffling to me. I mean, this was meant to be his final address to the nation. And what does he choose to go on a tangent about? Climate change being the cause of the California wildfires.
So much is at stake. Right now, the existential threat of climate change has never been clearer. Just look across the country, from California to North Carolina. That's why I signed the most significant climate and clean energy law ever in the history of the world, and the rest of the world is trying to model it now.
Kosha, what was he thinking? I mean, is that the best he can come up with, given that this was a final farewell speech to the nation?
You know, in some ways, Danica, it was fitting because it really punctuates just what his entire presidency has come to be known as, and what I think the history books are going to cast it as, in terms of just the weakness, the cognitive decline, poor execution of things like the Afghanistan withdrawal. In his final weeks in office, a raging inferno in Los Angeles. Yes, he's not directly responsible for governance in California, but it still is his party that's in charge there. And then this thing just sort of brings that to light again, that this is who he was and is and will be remembered as. You make a good point, too, that usually final addresses are meant to be big picture for the history book, something that when Americans look back on it in 20, 50, 100 years, it makes sense about this point in time in history that we're in. You usually don't go for tactical comments like that. But, you know, I guess he did. And for many people on the left, climate change is this big picture idea, and they just can't seem to let go of it. And that's why he decided to weave that in.
Look, it's just very bizarre. As you said, it's meant to be big picture. That's not big picture. He then also spoke about the abuse of power, including through the courts in America. Have a listen.
Whether we show the courage to stand up to the abuse of power or we yield to it, I know that believing in the idea of America means respecting the institutions that govern a free society: the presidency, the Congress, the courts.
Kosha, how very odd, considering the Department of Justice did just that.
Yes, I think that is classic projection. And, you know, the reality is, as we know, Trump won this election in a landslide. And a big issue in it was that he was seen as, you know, some could call him a martyr, some could call him a victim of judicial prosecution and persecution, really. Everybody knows that the Biden Justice Department went after Trump, went after J6ers, went after all sorts of other ordinary Americans while being asleep at the wheel for other very legitimate cases where prosecutorial action should have been brought and wasn't brought. So I think it's just, you know, classic projection. And there are still the diehard people on the left who don't see it that way, and they see Trump and his supporters as very, very guilty. Maybe he's just speaking to them. But by and large, based on the results of the last election, that whole premise has been resoundingly rejected. And it's a little bit rich coming from him to say that. But I think that's their talking line, and they're going to keep repeating it till the bitter end.
Yeah, very, very clear. Now, look, the incoming Secretary of State for Donald Trump's second term, Marco Rubio, has given quite a big boost to the AUKUS agreement ahead of the inauguration. This is what he said.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on AUKUS, the importance thereof, and getting this thing moving.
It's something that I think you're going to find very strong support for in this administration. We can leverage the power of these partnerships with allies, 2-3 countries in some cases, some broader in others, to reach outcomes and objectives, such as creating a geopolitical and strategic balance in the Indo-Pacific region and beyond.
Kosha, how important is this endorsement of AUKUS, and what will it mean under a second Trump administration, do you think?
Yes, I think, you know, those were pretty clearly spoken words by the incoming Secretary of State there. And if you just step back, you know, Trump's worldview, there's 2 or 3 guiding principles for it that are pretty clear by now in terms of how he views foreign policy. One is America first. So insofar as any deal puts American citizens and American national interests first, he will be in favor of it. This seems to fit that mold. 2 is one of his signature issues is China. And he's very hawkish and bullish in terms of how he thinks of China and wants to handle China economically, militarily, and otherwise. And this obviously seems to fit into that as well. And through his simplicity, Team Trump has never been a big fan of these big, convoluted, multilateral deals in general, in terms of foreign policy and even domestically big bills. And this one being, as Marco Rubio there said, between 3 countries, sort of easier to get your head around it. It's a little bit more straightforward. It is strategically important for China. And as of now, just given the location of Australia in that, and as well as the role of the UK in this 100-year-plus alliance between these 3 countries, it does put American interests first. And as long as it continues to do that, it is something that I expect they will continue to support.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it certainly seems to be going in that direction, but that's a big, strong indication that the Trump administration's happy with this agreement. Now, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, he's indicated that he may not meet President-elect Donald Trump until the second half of this year. Have a listen.
The last time the coalition were in government during Donald Trump's presidency for 4 years, President Trump wasn't able to visit Australia during that period. In the discussion that I had with him, I made it clear that he would always be welcome here.
Kosha, we know Albo once said that he was scared of Trump, so he's probably running a mile in the other direction. He's, of course, sending Penny Wong to the inauguration. He should have been there himself. But why do you think he seems to be desperately putting off meeting with Donald Trump?
Funnier words have rarely been spoken. If he said that he's afraid of Trump, that's probably not what you want to be projecting as a leader of any country. Who knows? I mean, he obviously is a little bit embattled right now. He's got a domestic election potentially coming up, and the heat is certainly picking up between the opposition and him over here. So he's trying to balance and juggle dealing with that with obviously new leadership change with the U.S. I think a savvy political move would be to figure out how to weave the two together in a way that helps him symbolically, optically, and even in terms of policy, maybe a couple of policy wins that he could get. But I don't know, maybe his calculus is that that's too difficult or maybe untenable, and he's sort of saying what he needs to say, saying that the U.S. president would be welcome here. Well, of course he would be, but not going beyond that and kind of outsourcing it to Penny Wong while he focuses on his re-election situation back home.
I mean, sure, there's a federal election coming up, but, you've got to meet with the leader of the free world. He should have been going to this inauguration. I think it's a disgrace that he's not there. I'm not sure what Penny Wong is going to achieve over in the United States. But look, now, all of our viewers will remember this viral moment between Jill Biden and Donald Trump, looking very chummy, I'd say very cosy at the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris last year. But now Jill Biden has revealed what the pair were actually chatting about in that moment. To quote her, to quote Donald Trump, "I had a good meeting with your husband in the Oval Office." That's what Trump said to Jill on the night. "Yes," Jill replied to Trump, "because you're both talkers." I thought that was quite funny, Kosha, that clearly they aren't enemies after all.
So much in this. So, these moments, whether it's this one or Jimmy Carter's funeral service the other day, the reading into people who are sworn enemies in public life and then engage in these pleasantries and niceties and are so nice with the small talk has been just a fun sort of full-time sport for a lot of people. This was a moment that went viral. President Trump even leveraged it when he launched his $200 fragrance on the back of that, which was funny. And I think it just shows that all those accusations of, he's a threat to democracy, he's an orange Hitler, the country's going to die if he comes in, obviously were not true. They never believed it. And I just feel bad for any of their supporters, Biden supporters or Obama supporters, who maybe on some level actually believed it, that the whole country is going to fall into the hands of an orange Hitler. What are they thinking probably when they see these niceties now? That's the only one I worry about them. But for everybody else, it just proves what we all know, which is that politics is so much about theatrics. And underneath the theatrics, the things they say in public often don't mean much, unfortunately.
Spot on, and you're right though. I mean, he was never a threat to democracy after all, was he? Despite the Biden's insistence, despite the Obamas of the world, they went on, and really they're all chummy underneath. I think you're right there. Now, just domestically for a moment, Teal MPs are reluctant to single out Anthony Albanese for escalating his personal attacks against Peter Dutton for being nasty, which I've got to say is quite fascinating because these independents campaigned on a platform to restore integrity integrity and respect to politics, but they're now calling for an end to mudslinging and personal insults in public debate. Well, Kosha, there's only been some mudslinging, and so far it's come from Labor. They have gone after Peter Dutton for the last month in particular. They're obsessed with Peter Dutton. I just wonder, why won't these Teals come out and say, Anthony Albanese, put it to rest? Could they perhaps need Anthony Albanese in the event of a minority? What do you think?
I'm sure political expediency and calculations such as the one you just laid out are factoring in for sure. I also think that, for the Teals, if you're in such a minority where you're sort of a symbolic vote, or some call them a protest vote, or maybe tactically they can advance a policy agenda on the margins here and there, but they're not anybody that really have true weight in Parliament and in the electoral system, it's kind of easy for them to stay above the fray. Yes, it's a laudable goal. We all would love it if we lived in a world with no personal insults, but we live in the real world where politics is a rough and tumble sport. It's only getting more so by the day all around the world. And if somebody punches you, you should be willing and able to punch back twice as hard. So I think some of it is sort of they're sitting on a safe perch over there, politically and symbolically, so it's easy for them to say that hey, be nice, but it just doesn't work that way when you're actually fighting for real votes and a real chance at gaining the majority.
Fair point, but I think it's going to be a dirty campaign between now and the federal election if this is anything to go by. Kosha Gada, nice to catch up. Thanks very much for joining me on the show this evening.